What do you strongly suspect but have no proof of? My oldest brother is actually my biological father. It just makes no sense to me otherwise. I have a cleft chin and no one else in my family does. This older brother was or is just a big mess all around. He brought different women to my parents' house every day and we would hear them. It makes no sense to me that he came out of that with zero children. It makes less sense since he's about 20 years older than me, which means my parents would have had me at a dangerously, for my mom, old age. I know it's not impossible, but it just makes a lot more sense this way. Plus, my parents always covered up for his wrongdoing, so it honestly wouldn't surprise me. I once asked my mom and she got upset. I didn't even ask her outright. I just said I had a dream that they told me my brother was really my father. She got super mad and refused to even discuss or acknowledge my dream. Weird as hell. I would still consider my mom my mom. I wouldn't consider my brother my dad if he were because he's a jerk. It's just something I think is highly probable. The DNA testing is currently hard for me. Those websites that upload the information so you can get your genetic tree aren't popular where I live. I'm also from a third world country and I'm currently too broke to do any tests. Also, I don't care too much. It wouldn't really make any difference. My father, grandpa, is an absolute jerk and so is my brother. And I talk to neither of them, so it really doesn't matter. It's simply something I figured out some time ago that I found funny. Also, definitely not adopted. I'm an exact copy of this brother, minus the cleft chin. I have no relatives to ask since, due to the fact that my father is such a dude, my whole nuclear family is estranged from the rest. So only my parents and other brother would know, but I'm not going to ask. I believe it would bring them distress, and it's honestly not important enough to cause that to them. A birth certificate is irrelevant. Back when I was born, again, in a third world country, you could put whatever on a birth certificate and it would fly. So mine says my parents are my biological parents, but due to the context, it means nearly nothing. The medical background being important is a very good point. Sadly, I'm currently a very broke college student, so I would have to wait some years until I graduate and get a job that allows me to have some spare money for that sort of thing. Story 2. That my cruel stepfather did some time, not exile, for 8 years when I was a teen, and that for a few years prior, we were actually running from the law, not hiding from the government because of his activism. This suddenly dawned on me about a month ago, more than a decade later. Kinda like how it suddenly clicks that the dog didn't go to a farm. I just did the math, and this was almost like 20 years ago. I'm Kenyan, and at that time we were under the dictatorship of Moi, and back then you couldn't say anything that painted the government wrongly. I was too young, maybe 13, to fully understand, but we were led to believe by my mother is that he did something bad to the government. At that time, it was common for political activists to go into exile, so we didn't question it. For about 2 years prior, I remember them making us move cities and stay indoors. The two kept disappearing without warning for weeks at a time, leaving me behind to babysit my 3 siblings. My mother ain't a saint either, but that's a story for another day. Towards the end, we lived in a 4-bedroom bungalow and we were instructed to stay in the bedrooms in the back at all times, never switching on the lights in the living areas that face the main street. We skipped a school year because of this. Then one day she came back alone and he never came back. Later, she mentioned he might be in Turkey. I think I made the connection that he had fled there and left it at that. To be honest, I was so happy that he was no longer at home and that I was finally free. His presence had been a constant darkness in our lives. Years later, my mother mentioned he's back and asked if we wanted him back. We all said no. He moved back to his hometown and I've never seen him again. Back then, they only kept manual records. If I wanted to find proof, I could check for his records at the high courts, but honestly, he was and still is a good riddance, so why bother? Man, as I write this, memories keep flooding in and I keep getting amazed that it took me this long to make the connection. Some stuff was so obvious. Story 3. I also suspect the whole Popeye's chicken craze was only to distract from the fact that our Amazon rainforests are on fire. This is our nature and supply of oxygen that's at stake here, but look at us going insane for GMO sandwiches. Popeyes made $22 million off of that sandwich in a week. About the same amount of land has been destroyed by the fire. The other day, I went to Popeyes to order the sandwich just to check it out, and the manager was outside telling people they were closing down because they ran out of everything. It was 5 p.m. They had nothing. I couldn't believe that we were so stupid to follow a trend that we completely forgot what's actually happening, which literally puts all of our lives at risk. The fact that not only did they run out of the sandwich, they ran out of everything too. which shows me that people like me who drove 15 minutes to their closest Popeyes specifically went to just try out that sandwich but were told they had none left and that they had no choice but to order something else. I thought he was going to tell me they had no more sandwiches since I did that whole drive. I was hungry, so I don't mind ordering something else, but even then, they had nothing, which proves that other people had the same mindset. There were a great number of people who were curious, like me, who drove all the way to the nearest Popeyes just to be told they had nothing left. If that isn't a genius marketing scheme for Popeyes to bring up those sales, then I don't know what is. We're so quick to go crazy over some Instagram memes and give up a few dollars for them, but if you get every stupid person to jump on the bandwagon, you're going to make $22 million in 1 week. Not even something to save our Amazon rainforest, which provides us with the most important part of living. And not only that, those poor animals and the ecosystem are completely destroyed. What kind of living creatures like us could ruin their own planet along with innocent creatures? So it's not that I disagree with the OP of this story in any way. If anything, kudos and high fives for his thoughtfulness about the Amazon rainforest. But man, he really has some kind of dislike for that Popeyes promotion. I mean, if it were me, I would choose Popeyes. I mean, it is a lot closer than the Amazon rainforest, but to each his own. Let's get on to the next story. This is story 4. Mathematician here. Here are 3 examples of some things that mathematicians strongly suspect are true but can't prove. Goldbox conjecture. This is the conjecture that if n is an even number greater than 4, then it can be expressed as the sum of 2 odd primes. So for example, 10 is equal to 7 plus 3, and 108 is equal to 101 plus 7. These are examples where Goldbox conjecture holds since we've written 10 as a sum of 2 primes, 7 and 3, and written 108 as a sum of 2 primes, 7 and 101. We've been able to prove some things that are very close to this. For example, we can show that every odd number greater than 5 is the sum of at most 3 primes, something which is implied by Goldbox conjecture. And we know that sufficiently large even numbers are expressible as a sum of a prime into numbers that have no more than 2 prime factors. So for example, one is allowed to write 32 equals 21 plus 11 since 21 is equal to 3 times 7, but one couldn't use 116 equals 105 plus 11 since 105 is equal to 3 times 5 times 7, and so 105 has 3 prime factors. Second, are there infinitely many even perfect numbers? A number is said to be perfect if, when you add up all of its divisors less than the number, you get the number itself. An example is 6. 1, 2, and 3 divide 6, and 1 plus 2 plus 3 equals to 6, so 6 is perfect. Another example is 28, since 1, 2, 4, 7, and 14 are the proper divisors of 28. 1 plus 2 plus 4 plus 7 plus 14 equals 28. A non-example is 10. 10 is not perfect since 1 plus 2 plus 5 is equal to 8, which is not 10. Whether there are infinitely many even perfect numbers has been a question of interest for centuries, if not millennia. The history gets hazy when we go back too far. We strongly suspect that there are infinitely many, and we can't even give a good approximation for how many there should be under a given x, but we can't prove it. The third problem is whether there are any odd perfect numbers. That is there any number which is odd and perfect? We strongly suspect that there aren't any. This too is a very old problem, although we don't know exactly how old. We do know a lot of things. For example, an odd perfect number needs to be very big, at least 101,500. In comparison, there are about at most 1,080 particles in the observable universe. And it must have at least 10 distinct prime factors, and it must have a lot of repeated prime factors. This problem is actually one near and dear to my heart, and some of my own research has been on this problem. Story 5. My uncle most likely ended my grandfather. Backstory: my grandfather passed away when my mom was 6. She was the second youngest of 9 kids. My grandfather was a tippler and was super cruel to my grandma. The older 4 to 5 kids knew this and were left to take care of things when he messed up. They hated him. The younger 4 kids, my mom included, only have fond memories of their dad. They were all less than 10 years old. Anyways, I always knew he frowned, but only recently did I find out that he went out fishing one day. This is rural Labrador, mind you, with my uncle, who was the third oldest, probably about 15 at the time. My uncle came home that night without him, soaking wet, and wouldn't tell anybody what happened. He still has never told anyone what happened that day and barely speaks. He's always been a bit odd and quiet. My oldest aunt, the oldest of nine, the most outspoken against my grandfather, won't speak of it either, and the two of them are really close. There's 32 plus of us in terms of cousins, and we all know different pieces of the story. Happy ending, my grandmother was single for the next 50 years of her life, but when she was 87, she moved into an assisted living home, found a man, and started dating. It turns out he was her high school sweetheart, and the last were together when she was 17, so exactly 70 years earlier. He wrote her poems and he played the accordion for her, and she danced. They were together for 9 years until she passed at 96 on February 6, 2014. He died on February 7, 2015. He was totally fine until the anniversary of her death when he declined suddenly and rapidly. I swear, none of this is a lie. It was in the local news, actually, the part about my grandmother finding her high school sweetheart. All right, so that was a nice, sweet ending to this story. I thought it was going to end on a sort of a bad note, but hey, he plays the accordion and it took him 70 years to find the love of his life from his high school. So, all's well ends well. Now, if you want to stay updated with more mysterious suspicions, please do make sure to smash that like button and hit subscribe. It really helps me out and keeps me motivated to keep sending you guys these stories. Here's the next one, Story 6. All the bad press incidents that happen to these big companies are actually staged by the big companies themselves as a form of advertising. Remember the Starbucks Christmas cup one? They had some Christmas stuff on their cups, then took it off. Christians went mad about it. But here's the end result. You couldn't go on Facebook for a week without seeing that Starbucks woman logo everywhere. Some local papers and news outlets even talked about it. Then what was the damage? Christians supposedly didn't like it, but my theory is that Starbucks' advertising company themselves created the memes on Facebook and circulated them. But do you know of any that really stopped drinking coffee over it? Everyone else didn't give a damn, so what's the result? There was not much of an impact on your logo and the name being everywhere in the media for a week. How much is that worth in advertising dollars? Likewise, how about when Nike was going to make that flag shoe and then supposedly Kaepernick had the whole thing called off? LOL, I'm sure he's at the Nike strategy meetings. You supposedly lost your chance to buy the flag shoe, I guess, but what was the result? Again, they were everywhere on social media and in the news for a week. That Nike swoosh logo is everywhere. Story 7. Aubrey McClendon, former CEO of Chesapeake Energy and American Energy Partners, is still alive and living on a private island in the middle of nowhere. If you take a look at how he self-destructed, it doesn't add up. The SEC and FBI were going to indict him on some charges that would have put him away for life. Being a billionaire, I suspect he faked his own end to get away from doing time. I have spoken with several businessmen who knew Aubrey personally, and they suspect the same thing. One of them even met with Aubrey's parents the week after his alleged self-destruction. They seemed perfectly content, almost as if they hadn't lost a son. Another reason I suspect he faked it is because of the way he did it. Nobody does it by ramming their CNG Suburban into the side of a bridge at 88 miles per hour. CNG cars have a greater tendency to explode, and they also burn at a much higher temperature, which helps char the body. The only identifying information that was found, other than the license plates on the car, was his wallet with ID thrown out meters away from the smoldering car. Now tell me that isn't obvious. So here's a story that I wasn't aware about, but hey, thank you for teaching me something new today. That the best way not to go is to go off the side of a bridge at 88 miles per hour. Alright, so on to the next story. This is story 8. That the purpose of life in the universe is purely to create a new universe. To me, this is the only way for any life to ensure its survival forever. And I'm not talking about just human life. I think the chances of us surviving are super slim. Consider this. We can safely assume that every problem we will ever encounter will have a solution. If a species has enough resources to exploit any resources it wants, luck is on their side, and they don't hit any Fermi walls, then the only limiting factor to life solving a problem is time. In the universe, time is not infinite. There will be a time when the very atoms in the universe starts to decay. This is life's final deadline. If life in its varying forms cannot find a way to escape the universe before this happens, life in the universe will end forever. And how does one escape a universe while being inside a decaying universe? You must perform the genesis of a new one, or perhaps several new ones. This is the ultimate problem to solve because the universe makes it so. So if the mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell, life is the powerhouse of the universe. Story 9. Uncontacted or barely contacted people we'd call giants have absolutely existed during modern human times. This isn't anywhere near definitive proof, so I think it counts for the thread. A French anthropologist discovered a set of human like bones in 1890 that would have likely belonged to a human like creature that was almost 12 feet tall. Those bones were sent to the Paris Academy of Sciences for further review and basically disappeared as far as I know. There were also remains recovered from somewhere in the southwestern USA that indicates a possible native tribe where what we might call giants actually lived. And the weird story someone told a blogger about US soldiers encountering a cave dwelling 12-foot tall, spear wielding giant in rural Afghanistan in the early 2000s, shortly after the start of the War on Terror. The Department of Defense naturally released a statement saying no such thing occurred, but that's an oddly specific story to come up with. There is so much more unexplored, uncharted space in the world that I don't think it's unreasonable to believe very genetically unique people or creatures are living in remote areas of the planet. Some might be massive by average standards, some might have purple skin. Who knows? I don't want to rule it out. I like having anything possible. Story 10. That my friend's wife ended him. He never got sick, yet he fell seriously ill and, in a matter of a couple days, passed away. She left him alone to get a prescription. He was cold when she got back. I was his first love and we remained close. He told me he was going to divorce her, and then the next week he was gone. His current wife, his ex-wife, and I met with the funeral director, and we all agreed an autopsy was needed. After we left, she called back and said no autopsy, straight to cremation. His teenage kids, their mom, the ex-wife, and I were at his place looking for his paperwork when the current wife said he left everything to her. I found out his beneficiaries were changed online the week before. I got it reversed. I also made sure his kids got a lot of his belongings. Much of his stuff was what he and I had purchased together, so I knew its value where she didn't. But she didn't want his daughter to have anything and his son to have very little. The ex and I got an attorney to force her into probate, and I assisted the attorney in getting as much of his estate as possible for the kids. She ended up with less than half of what she thought she was going to get, but that doesn't bring him back. Story 11. My girlfriend has a thing with her roommate. We live in different countries. We've been doing this LDR thing for years now. Around 2 years ago, she met this girl from work. They became very close and they decided to be roommates. Now, this girl, who is now her close friend, is now part of every aspect of her life. Whatever she does, they'll be together. Every time my girlfriend is off from work, her roommate also is. At every family gathering, she's also there. Anything, and I mean anything that she does, this girl is with her. If you see a picture of them, they look like a lesy couple because this girl looks like a man, like she doesn't look like a girl, but a full-blown transition man. My girlfriend denies that she is not a lesbian or whatever and claims that she is very much a girl and just happens to look like that. Also, since my girlfriend became close with her, my girlfriend's attitude towards me has been changing slowly. She is now very cold to me, and our relationship went from being a couple to now seeming like an acquaintance kind of a relationship. Story 12. There's a conspiracy within the Canadian federal government to provide employment and contracts to French-speaking people as their way of keeping their own power and significance for French people in the country. You must have thorough fluency in French with extremely rigid and overly difficult testing for English natives to pass and prove they have strong enough command over a secondary French language in order to even get technical roles, little on management, which makes higher paying positions and multi-million-dollar contracts outside the reach of English-speaking people. Our IT infrastructure is falling apart. There are long delays and terribly implemented websites and applications, but the people involved who built it all speak French, and that seems to be the main metric that matters when hiring or filling roles. It's BS because it harms low-income Canadians who need government services the most, and they have to use overly complicated systems which often lead old or sick people to give up on receiving assistance. This is all a plot by the French to keep English-speaking Canadians poor and out of the government, and the worse the government systems are for paying out to Canadians, the better, because that's one less person being paid from the coffers even if it's money they deserve. The French people lost the 7-year war against the English, and so they have kicked and screamed, wasted billions of tax dollars, and continue to manipulate the government to favor policies that only benefit them. Meanwhile, Quebec is the most prejudiced place in Canada. French Quebecers are some of the most overly prejudiced people I've seen in Canada, and selfishness and bitter resentment toward all things non francophone are extremely prevalent. And here I am thinking that all Canadians are really nice people. I guess maybe not the French Canadians? I don't know. I'm just relying on this story. One day I'll have to see and hear it and experience it for myself. Until then, let's go ahead and get to story 13. My mom and dad were traders in the 1970s. My mother's brothers were definitely dealers, but they've been arrested so often that they'd always be searched when re entering the US from Mexico. Yes, my family is Mexican, but we've been in America for 3 generations now. Enter my mom and dad, who, when I was a child, suddenly wanted to do a little shopping every summer in Ciudad de Juarez, right across the border. It only took us a 5-hour drive across Texas in the middle of 114-degree heat in the shade, and there was no shade while the radiator overheated. Once there, we'd do touristy stuff, maybe see a bullfight, but it definitely wasn't Disneyland. I once asked my parents, why do we keep coming here? And they replied because the prices were so much lower. Yeah, right. Driving that far and risking stranding your children in the desert to suffer from heat stroke was worth getting a paper mache piggy bank shaped like a pig painted with flowers? Even more inexplicable was how, once we returned home, Ma and Pa would make these stops at biker bars, tattoo parlors, and head shops in town. Oh, I used to love the blacklight glow poster room at the head shop. That's where the folks would leave us when they mysteriously disappeared with the owners. It only took me, 40 years to figure that out, that traveling with small children in a family unit was the perfect cover for mules? So, thanks for delving into the world of unproven suspicions with me on this video. Now, before you go, please don't forget to check out our related video coming up next. What's an urban legend that turned out to be true? Story 1 is wildly intriguing and almost unbelievable, but it is. I'll see you there, and thank you for watching this one.